All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. We're going to be discussing Mary K. Greer. And one of the things we're going to be talking about is this fantastic book that she wrote, Women of the Golden Dawn, Rebels and Priestesses. But let me tell you a little bit more about Mary. Mary is an independent scholar, writer, teacher, and professional tarot consultant known for her innovative teaching techniques with nearly 50 years of experience. She is the author of 11 books on tarot and magic, including the groundbreaking Tarot for Yourself. She is the recipient of the 2007 International Tarot Lifetime Achievement Award, the Mercury Award for Excellence in Communications in the Metaphysical Field, and the Cover Award for Best Divination Book. Mary Greer is featured at conferences and workshops in the United States and abroad. And another thing that Mary does is that she has a very wide following in the women's and pagan communities for her work in women's spirituality and magic. A priestess in the Fellowship of Isis, she is founder of the Ism of Isis Aurora. Is that how you say it, Mary?
The Iseum of Isis Aurea,
Thank you very much.
Golden Isis.
Thank you. Mary is the author of many books on tarot and magic, including the classic Tarot for Yourself, a workbook for personal transformation, and a forthcoming new edition of The Essence of Magic, Tarot, Ritual, and Aromatherapy. She wrote the scholarly biography of 4 19th century women magicians, our book, Women of the Golden Dawn, Rebels and Priestesses, and was a co-author of the biography and art book, Pamela Coleman Smith, The Untold Story. Mary Greer has a master's degree in English literature from the University of Central Florida, where she first taught tarot in 1974. She also served on the faculty and the administration of New College of California in San Francisco for 11 years. She currently lives in Northern California, and let's welcome Mary Greer. Thank you, Mary, so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this.
Well, I'm so excited because I read about you before even I got a chance to meet you. And your book, Women of the Golden Dawn, was such an essential book for me to learn so much about not only the history of tarot, but these fantastic women that we're going to talk about. So before I go to our slideshow presentation, I'd like to ask you, Mary, how did you come about writing this book? And what channels did you use to get all the fantastic images of art that are in here?
Oh, um, to make a long story short, I had studied William Butler Yeats, of course, in my English literature classes, and was familiar with his relationship with Maud Gonne, and she had intrigued me all along. So when I started looking at the Women of the Golden Dawn and wanting to write about what made it different for them to be, for there to be women in there, and could I find out any information, she was one of the people that I could find a very significant amount of information about. And that's, as I looked through the women, I realized there weren't very many of them that there was any information about. Maybe it would say who their husband was, maybe there would be, a brief statement, and for many of them, no information besides that they were members and their magical motto. So Florence Farr, Annie Horniman, those two, along with Maud Gonne, most of the information, or a large part of it, came from books about Bernard Shaw and William Butler Yeats, or their letters between each of them, because there was a whole book of letters of Bernard Shaw and Florence Farr and Annie Horniman. So, I could collect their actual letters from the books of correspondence with these famous people, as well as commentaries by them about interacting with them, and ferreted through the years a lot more stuff. So this was before there was very much information on the internet. It was mostly just setting up some kinds, there were mechanisms for corresponding with each other in groups, but it was still kind of a Wild West scene. And so it was interlibrary loan.
Wow.
I was at the library a couple of times a week sometimes, and ordering and returning interlibrary loan books, which was actually wonderful. I got them from all over the place in some major libraries. It was amazing what you could get then. Also correspondences and some of the other people who had researched in England, like the life of Annie Horniman and some material about Florence Farr. So I was able to kind of piggyback off of their works and the things that they cited, as well as all the stuff I could find in the magical realm and the people I was able to contact. Yeah.
Fantastic. And what year was that?
I started writing it in 89, finished it in 94, and of course it was published in 95.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Great research in there. Just a fantastic encyclopedia of who those people were. Well, without
Yeah.
any further ado, I'm going to jump into our presentation so you can see some of the subjects that we're talking about with this. Go here. All right. Can people see the screen for the slideshow? All right.
I see a nod. Yeah.
So here we have our discussion today is going to be about the Golden Dawn women: Olivia Shakespeare, Annie Horniman, Florence Farr, Maud Gonne, and Moina Mathers. And our lovely book that Mary has just described to us, all the years that she spent researching it. And now we're going to talk about some of these women that Mary was talking about. Mary, can you introduce the people that are here on the screen?
Oh, okay. So on the far left, we have Moina Mathers. Her first name, her original name was Mina Bergson. She was the sister of Henri Bergson, the French philosopher. He was born and educated in France, although his family was originally from Poland. Polish Jews, and the mother was from a Jewish family in England. So then we have Annie Horniman in one of her fabulous dresses that somebody said looked like curtains, like William Morris curtains. But those beautiful brocade, she just loved those. And then we have Florence Farr, who is an actress, and much, much more than that. And then we have Maud Gonne on the far right, who became an Irish revolutionary, although she was actually the daughter of a British soldier.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
So these are four really powerhouse women that were part of this Golden Dawn.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a
Yes.
little bit more of a deep dive into Moina, because she seemed to be one of the first people that was involved with the Golden Dawn because of her connection with Samuel Mathers, who she met when she was just studying at the British Library. But I want to talk a little bit about her amazing skills as an artist. She actually went to something called the Slade School of Art, and it was one of the first universities that let women in. And because of her immense talents, she also befriended two other women that became part of the Golden Dawn. She was known as someone who was an evoker of spirits. And she was really, in some ways, would you say she was more like almost the elfin spirit channeler of the women of the Golden Dawn? What do you think her essence was like?
I'm not sure about Elfin, but she did channel. She appeared to, from the few references to it that we have, which are very minimal, is that she would go into trance and supposedly filled out a lot of the later rituals that were involved, because originally they just appeared in kind of an outline form. And so she supposedly made major contributions in terms of her ability to vision or see, but we've got minimal descriptions of the actual process, just some comments about her doing this kind of visioning.
And certainly she was so attractive. She was like this little, dark-haired visionary wearing these gowns and such. The middle painting was done by Beatrice Offer, another Slade student. And the title of this painting is called Circe. And then, of course, we have a photograph of Moina when she was doing the rituals when she was in Paris with her husband. And here's one more image of her when she was doing another rites of Isis, supposedly in the
Yeah.
temple in Paris. So that's our first introduction to one of our ladies of the Golden Dawn. And now we're going to talk more about the Slade School of Art, because this seems to be an institution that actually fed quite a few members of the Golden Dawn women. In fact, Beatrice, who is talking about, had a studio not only with Moina, but also with Annie Horniman. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they were roommates or not, but they definitely became close friends while at the
Exactly.
Slade.
And the thing I love, Mary and I were talking about the Slade School of Art earlier. You can see on the far left this etching of women actually getting to go to art school, but you can notice that all of the male statues that they're sketching from have castrated men. So the men actually
It's
got to have live nude women, but women got to sketch from statues of eunuchs. So I don't know if that was a fair trade. And here on the right, we have, I think it's the graduating class of 1901 of all the female artists at Slade School. The Slade School opened in 1871 on Gower Street, and it was the first public art school in Europe to admit women, although no male nudes. And it's this Felix Slade was the one who envisaged this school where fine art would be studied within a liberal arts university. So the next person we're talking about, of course, is Annie Horniman, who
yeah.
met Moina at Slade and became quite infatuated with her, became a big champion of hers. Do you think that Annie had artistic talents, Mary?
Um, I don't know if I've ever seen a drawing or painting she did. She did do costume design later, and the complaints were that she would make it far more elaborate than what was needed in the situation, with her love of fabrics and so on. But so she was art-minded and probably had basic um, sketching skills. One of the things they didn't have Xeroxes, and so educated people were always trained to do basic sketching and art for their studies because they needed to make copies of things.
The thing I thought was so interesting about Annie is that she was the first person to be initiated in the second order. And the fact that they were coming up with these different stratas of study at the Golden Dawn. But in addition to that, she also, when she went to Slade, part of the reason she could study so well is that she had what was called a reader's ticket to the British Museum. And Mary, you were saying you actually had a reader's ticket to the British
Yes,
Museum?
I did. In addition to all the other stuff that I mentioned, I spent about a month in England and Ireland, and I wrote ahead, got permission, um, and so I was able to go in every day as if I was going to work. And before the museum itself actually opened, I would go into the library to do my work for the day. Yeah, it was a really exciting time.
So, and here's Beatrice. This was the third person from Slade. Actually, there were four that we know of
Yeah.
who went to the Slade and became part of the Golden Dawn. She was quite a successful painter at the time. In fact, the portraits of her characters were known as offer heads. And people were really quite enthused to do them. She was the one who did the painting of Moina as the crystal gazer, as Circe on the left as her sister. She was quite a talented person. The studio that she shared with Moina and Annie was in Fitzrovia, wherever that is. And they
Mhm.
supposedly went to Golden Dawn meetings together. Um, and here we have Florence Farr. She did not go to Slade. But can you tell us a little bit about Florence?
Let's see. Her father named her after Florence Nightingale, who he worked with personally for the majority of his professional and her professional life. They came up with standards for how you judge insurance matters. There's a term for it. Anyway, uh, yeah, so they worked in the medical field, and she was very close with her father, who died of dementia. It was a big pain for her in her life to see somebody go through that kind of dementia and loss of self from a very intelligent, brilliant man. She became an actor and actually introduced the works of Ibsen, some of the most famous early female figures from Ibsen to the British public, as well as later doing music and chanting to Yeats's poetry.
Yeah, so this harp that she's holding, this was quite known as part of her whole performing when she was accompanying Yeats's poetry. She was quite the child. We will talk more about her later. But
Yeah.
speaking of the British Museum, Florence used to use her time there to channel a particular adept or spirit in the Egyptian rooms. And there was quite controversial. I don't think Annie Horniman liked that very much. That might have been a little too out there for her. But Florence as well spent a lot of time in the British Museum. And here we have our last four most prominent person we're talking about tonight is Maud Gonne. And you were saying she was actually born to a British father. Did she join the Golden Dawn because Yeats was in it, or did Yeats meet her at the Golden Dawn?
Yeats met her in this a scene that he kind of used as the basis for some of his poems. Um, I think it was springtime, and there were the peach blossoms or whatever that he likened to her skin and face. So they met in Belgrade Square, and so let's see, what was it? He talked her into joining the Golden Dawn in order to spend even more time with her, because he fell in love with her instantly. Yeats did.
Yes. And created some of
Yes.
the greatest love poetry because of it.
Yes.
Yes. And she seemed to become very interested in the techniques of astral travel. That seemed to be the main ambition that she had in going to the Golden Dawn is to.
Astral travel, visioning, the going to sacred sites. And one of the things she would do is she would go to a sacred well at one point of place in Ireland, and then carry that sacred water after having, the encounter with whatever beings were there. And according to their direction, she would take it to another place in Ireland to kind of begin creating this grid of magical spaces and sources. And she took some other people with her that were interested in doing this work. And they had a plan to create a castle of heroes based on a kind of quasi-Golden Dawn magical initiatory system, but for Ireland, to connect back with all of the great spirits of Ireland.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it
I
was
never
a
knew.
visionary traveling to these different connections with the ancient gods and goddesses of Ireland.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So here we have the British Museum. You can see actually even in Paris, this idea of going to a museum and looking at the Egyptian exhibits was huge. This is a sketch by Edgar Degas, of the painter Mary Cassatt, and they're looking at some Egyptian artifacts. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was this fantastic reading room, which Mary, you actually got to spend some time in one of them, right?
Yeah. Yes, the British Library is no longer in the British Museum, where it had been up until, I don't, it would have been close to the year 2000 when they totally redid it. So I was able to do my research in the reading room, in possibly the tables that they still sat at, because they hadn't changed any of that at that point. It was just so amazing. And I do have to say, this one thing that happened was while I was in England and Ireland at the museums and libraries, was during a period when there was a lot of bomb scares. And so I had lunch at the cafeteria in the museum. And then, as my usual thing was, I would take a walk through a different section of the museum before going back to work. And I was in one of the mummy rooms on the second floor, American second floor. And it's a huge, big room with these almost two-story double doors, really heavy wood. And they called a bomb scare. And you could hear down the aisle, because they told everybody to stay where they were. And you could hear these big double doors clanging shut on each of the great rooms of the museum, and it clanged shut on mine. And there I was in the room with the mummies, with all laid out. And there was a small child that was with his mother, who was saying, "Oh, Mom, are we going to be okay?" And I'm just glorying in this, thinking, "Oh, can I get in touch with the mummies while I'm here?" So I wasn't in there. We weren't there for more than probably about 15 minutes. But it was one of those moments where I thought, take a deep breath, see if I can connect.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
And did you feel anything with the mummy, or was the mummy on strike because of the bombs?
It wasn't anything more than just kind of taking in the scent and the energy of it. So I've never been especially good at making those deep connections, especially on call like that.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to talk about this Golden Dawn, what this group was when they all got together. And it was founded in 1887. And this order decided that they were going to study particular emphasis on learning and scholarship about magic, as well as the practice of rituals. And it was also founded with the idea of the cipher manuscript. Can you talk a little bit about that, Mary, about what was this manuscript that Westcott had pulled together?
Actually, before I mention the cipher manuscript, I should say that the main point of the Golden Dawn was to make a connection with your holy guardian angel. Or the holy guardian angel, in a sense of the whole work, and to come into conversation with it. So the idea of coming into conversation with not just guides, but also angelic beings. And we also can do that in tarot readings, where we call on a particular angel that oversees the tarot. But yes, to come into conversation with your holy guardian angel was the whole purpose. And so the cipher manuscript was probably written by a man named Kenneth Mackenzie, who joined every single magical and fraternal order that he could possibly join. And he also created a couple of orders, one of which still exists today. I can't remember the name of it because it's not one that it's not particularly magical. It's a more spiritual one. But he actually designed rituals for quite a few different magical or different orders of various kinds. And when he died, William Westcott and Woodford went to his wife immediately and asked her if there were any papers that they could benefit from. And so it's not known for sure. It was never absolutely written down that this is what happened, but very likely she gave him this outline of a series of rituals based on initiations organized around the tarot major arcana. And he had gone twice to France to discuss with Eliphas Levi, the great French tarotist and magician, their various theories about the Kabbalah and astrology and the connections to tarot. So he had worked out a system of his own, Mackenzie had, that we do have a letter where he stated that he couldn't reveal the system that he had come up with because it would be too much danger to humankind. So it's believed that that is, of course, the unique system that was used by the Golden Dawn in their initiation rituals, and of course in our whole Golden Dawn practice of tarot.
Well, I think it's so fascinating that you have set this premise of what the purpose of the Golden Dawn is, Mary, because I have never heard it stated so succinctly that it's to get in touch with your, did you call it a guardian angel or
The holy, the holy guardian angel, yeah,
that's lovely. Yeah.
HGA, yeah.
Well, and it's kind of amazing at this time when magic was sort of emerging from the sidelines because of science. Anything seemed possible, electricity and radio and telegraph. And now maybe you could really commune with the gods and with spirits. I think that's a wonderful thing. And the fact that this private group in 1887 let women join, which up until that
Yes.
point, it was very rare for women to even be allowed to go to the library by themselves or belong to a club. So in this degree of studies with the Golden Dawn, I found this sort of breakdown of the first, second, and third order in terms of what it was
Yeah.
that you were expected to study. But Mary, can you say what were the sorts of subjects you would be studying when you studied to pass these orders? Was
Ah.
it Kabbalah? Was it astrology?
Yeah, you had to memorize, of course, the Hebrew letters. You had to memorize what's later been characterized as the AAN, the Astro-Alphanumeric Code that linked the astrology, the numerology, and the Kabbalah together with the Tarot Major Arcana. And so with the Zelator initiation, and actually I think the Neophyte too, they began with um, each initiation had a tarot card that would go along with it that would be part of the material integrated into the initiation rite, kind of the key to the knowledge of that level. But so you had the Kabbalah. You also had the angels, the Enochian alphabet, which was supposedly the alphabet of the angels, which was different than the Kabbalistic Hebrew letters, and was used very specifically for that. The 72 names, divine names of God, and yeah, we can go
Wow.
on and on and on. And it is a lot of memorization, which is why later on Florence Farr, who didn't really think that memorization made you a better magician than not memorizing, she was a little lax on some of the testing that was done. But when they started out, if you had a good memory and could memorize, you could move through very quickly. Whereas if you couldn't memorize well, like Pamela Coleman Smith was in a Golden Dawn order for many years, but didn't really advance, probably because she didn't like memorizing. That's my theory.
I don't blame her.
Yeah, and
And
I'm
when you
not good at memorizing, so it's when I did my the second Zelator initiation, I had to memorize a bunch of stuff, which I used for years, but I hadn't sat down and specifically memorized it. And there were oaths that you had to memorize and all these other things. And I can tell you, I worked for probably 2 weeks memorizing all of that. Went in, took the exam, and they go, "Oh, it's fine. You're doing great." Yeah. And I'm going, "Wait a minute. Let me tell you every single thing I memorized."
I'm not
And they're
done.
going, "No, you've got it. You've got it. You've got it. You said 3 of the 22 Hebrew letters. You're fine." I'm going, "No."
So when you say tarot cards, at that time, Pamela hadn't created the Waite Smith or Rider Waite deck. Were they using the Marseille deck for this, for their
For
studies?
practical readings, they used a variety of continental decks, but primarily a Marseille type or one of the Italian decks, the Soprafino style. And there was also Swiss decks
Oh,
that
right.
with just minor variations among them. So it depended on who was going where on the continent and what decks they came across for playing, decks used for playing games, of course, and brought back with them. And then they would write on them the differences, like switching strength and justice from the Marseille numbering to the numbering that was found in the cipher manuscript. So the
Wow.
cipher manuscript actually was the one that said 0, the fool, is Aleph. It begins the Hebrew letters and all the other letters follow through from that. The French at that point were thinking that the fool was probably Shin, which is the next to the last Hebrew letter. And so they had a different system.
I see. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And talking about the first order, I was reading that the whole idea of this is that the students must learn to realize and balance the 4 elements as indispensable ingredients of their own psychological and spiritual makeup. But it sounds like you also had to do a lot of memorization, as you said.
Well, you had to be able to work within this, like the decans, in astrology, every sign is broken into 3 that's ruled over one of the planets. There's all these different systems. And what happens is when they would do their scrying or astral traveling, and they would go to Venus or to Mars to see whether or not they were actually in that location, they would do tests checking to see whether the appropriate astrological sign, they would kind of call forth, show me the sign of Mars in, this connection. And if they didn't get in their vision the appropriate sign back, the idea was get out of there quick,
Oh, oh,
because you want to make sure you're in the place you think you're in, and
right.
therefore the imagery and the calling forth of confirmation signs will be part of the system you've learned.
Oh, interesting. So you don't get shuttled to a bad energy place.
Exactly.
And so talking about one of the you know, exercises, I guess, that they had in terms of the first degree. Florence actually had this. I think this might have been in your book, Mary, the whole idea of harnessing imagination. I thought this was almost a beautiful yogic type of meditation in terms of stilling your mind. We keep talking about this as in meditation, even today, how essential it is to access that blissful state in order to really make anything
Yeah.
happen. So
Hmm.
I just thought that was a lovely uh, exercise here to collect your
Yeah.
wandering thoughts, distill yourself, and to unify with divine understanding. Which that
Yeah.
seems a mouthful right there, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and if this is the first degree level testing, they haven't gotten quite into the next thing after stilling all thoughts and images, would be to be calling on the signs to confirm that they were in the place that they thought they were. And if any of the item 6, degree of privation, terror, anguish, came up, that would be another sign to leave, as well as, and they could also use their knowledge of particular signs based on the correspondences to test any figure that came forward, to clear any of their anguish or concern. Calling on that imagery was what would um, keep them safe.
Yeah, that's a
in
good
this.
way to put it. Keep you safe, because it's not always a safe thing to meddle with magic, is it?
Yeah,
There's a
exactly.
cost to it. And going to the second order, the thing that I thought was so interesting, that in this order, it was all about getting to practice ceremonial magic and make your own magical tools.
Yeah.
And that this was, oh, can you talk a little bit about what exactly is Enochian magic?
Oh, don't ask me, because that's it's when Paul Foster Case, who was an initiate of the Golden Dawn, when he wrote his books on tarot, he eliminated Enochian magic and the Enochian alphabet.
Oh,
He felt that that was actually a little dangerous to get into, because it's the language of the angels, and if you're not really careful, you can get into, um, not doing it right, which would call in the wrong figures. So he felt that it was not actually the best. But members did feel uh, there's what they call Enochian squares that can be used for calling on different angelic and God form figures. And they had to learn all of these. They had to color them. And actually, Florence Farr, for a while, was doing coloring for some of the initiates who didn't either have the time or the artistic ability to color correctly. And it needed to be done right. So she made actually some extra money doing that.
oh my goodness.
So they got help, even though they were supposed to make their own wands, their own, Grail cup and so on, and pentacle, and various other tools. They often would get help from someone else in the order that
And this
was
seems like
better.
that the whole idea of the second order, that there were three chiefs that would run it, and they were responsible for handing it down. And the chiefs
Yeah,
were called the Premonstrator. Is that right? That's the title,
yeah.
the people who hold the keys to the rituals, if you're ready to. And I think it's interesting that Florence was a Premonstrator, and was Annie at one time too, or was it only just
She
Florence?
was a sub
Okay,
premonstrator. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm. My
And going,
Latin pronunciation gets kind of messy, so if it's, please forgive me if
no
the,
worries.
epissimus, I'm not sure. And also different people pronounce these kind of Latin-based words differently because
Yes.
there was Church Latin and then there was the intellectual Latin, and they pronounced some of the things differently.
And so going on
Yeah.
to this third order, this seemed to be the order that everybody wanted to get to because this was the order that you'd actually get to not only astral travel, but commune with the gods, possibly channel a god. And the thing that I loved about this is that these grades are not attained by living initiates. So other spirits grade you? I mean, how does this happen? I was a little perplexed.
At this point in the initiations, we don't have a lot of information about it. I think there is an 8-3 initiation. I'm not sure if we have one of the 9-2 initiations, but the New Zealand order was one of the few that actually took it up to this level. And it was, you were in communication with those, your guardian angel and with the gods that were represented behind this. And so it was, um, at this point, you were getting in direct communication with these forms yourself.
I see. And that's
Yeah,
fairly dangerous because is it possession? Will they leave? I mean, do you have to
yeah.
backtrack through all this? And the thing that I really love is that there seems to be this introduction of Egyptian magical influence that's happening. I mean, Florence with her studying Mutant Menu at the museum. And I didn't know about this until I found it in your book that
Yes,
she actually drew these two pictures of this spirit she was communicating with. Is that correct?
yes, yeah.
And they were both saying they were studying the courses of the Golden Dawn, and that was part of their conversation.
Um, I don't know if they were studying the courses, but they became kind of her personal guides. And she had a group called the Sphere Group, which was kind of an offshoot of the Golden Dawn. You had to be initiated into the Golden Dawn, but they did their own workings and were guided by the material from, these figures, which ironically, this was based on a cartouche or a what do you call it? The coffin of a priestess. But the mummy that was in the coffin had been placed in there in Victorian times, early Victorian times, by some explorer, and was actually a male mummy. So she thought she was getting in touch with a female figure. The coffin was the right one, but the mummy inside it was not the female priestess that she thought she
Oh
was
my goodness.
communing with. So, I mean, who knows? If you're dealing on the astral level, you can transcend all of that stuff
That's
anyway.
right. That's right. And the thing I think that was interesting is at about this time that Florence was going to the British Museum and communicating with this spirit, that was the time that Moina and Samuel had gone to Paris to open up the
Yeah.
the office there, and that Florence had written him and said, listen, this spirit is attaining an 8-degree equal 30-degree. I think she's part of our group. And then Annie got all bent out of shape because it seems that Annie Horniman didn't really want the Egyptian influences as part of the curriculum for the Golden Dawn.
Yeah, there were people who, lent more towards, Greek or whatever. There'd always been an Egyptian influence, but for them to start coming through as the spirit guides, that
Ah,
was another thing, rather than the more Kabbalistic, angelic order. It was bringing in a whole different thing. And there was also, I think, kind of a suspicion of Florence going off and having her own group doing their own work. The Sphere Group, by the way, was based on the idea of the Tree of Life being three-dimensional, so that you could actually stand there at the base and look up through, a four-sided Tree of Life. And then they would imagine it in the room that they were in, and then they would start expanding it to all of London and all of England and the whole earth. and then start taking in the stars. And the core idea was, because it was rather troublesome times leading up to what became eventually World War One, but it was all these conflicts that were happening, like in South Africa, the Boers, and all over the place. There were the colonies were beginning to revolt. And so they were trying to bring together peace.
I mean, it's sort of like the astro healing that people are trying to do now in a way. I mean, she was
Yeah.
really ahead of her time, but Annie Horniman didn't like that, did she? She didn't think
Yeah,
that
the idea of it was under these Egyptian figures that hadn't been part of the original plan.
well, and you know what's so interesting in studying Pamela Coleman Smith, whose birthday it is today, um,
Yes.
is that Pamela didn't mind, callings or, researching some of the Egyptian symbols for her tarot cards. And in that wonderful, this is one of Stewart's encyclopedias, but in that book that you wrote with him, the Pamela Coleman Smith, The Untold Story,
Mhm.
there were sightings where you're talking about how she sort of grazed and sort of incorporated different cultures into her cards. Which, do you think that that was something that Annie would have approved of, or was that the reason why Waite had to go outside of the Golden Dawn to hire Pamela?
Well, Waite never revealed the secrets of the Golden Dawn per se. He was very careful about that. He would draw some phrasing from it, but not anything that could be identified. Like he did not, he put the Fool as the next to last card in his book, although he numbered it 0. But he never referenced Kabbalah in association with it. And so there was no revealing that the Fool was Aleph and the magician was Beit, the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So he was very careful to do that. There's not really Egyptian symbolism per se, in other than there's some pyramids in the background, especially the court cards and stuff, but not the detailed Egyptian stuff in here. Waite wanted a deck that could be used by anybody with the larger esoteric understanding that the Golden Dawn drew from in their teachings, but it wasn't their secrets. And
Got
their primary secret was the one that Kenneth Mackenzie came up with, or I believe it was Kenneth Mackenzie, which was that the Fool is Aleph and everything follows from that. And also that strength and justice are reversed from the Marseille order, so that strength could be Leo and justice could be Libra in the order of the signs of the
Wow,
zodiac.
that's
Yeah,
fantastic. So
yeah.
this gets to the second level, when they were beginning to do some of these learned things like doing the Golden Dawn rituals. Here we had some images that were either drawn by or inspired by Moina. In the very center, you can see it looks like there is an almost Egyptian ritual that's happening. This was just a book plate that she had created when they were living in Paris,
Oh.
although it was for someplace in London, you can see. And then here on the very right, Samuel Mathers was doing the reinterpretation of this Abra Mellon book, and Moina was commissioned to draw the cover for it. But I think one of my favorite images that I've always
Yeah.
associated with what is a ritual that Golden Dawn did or does is this whole idea of manifesting a spirit to present itself to you, which is in the
Mhm.
illustration on the far left, which looks like it could be Samuel when he would be dressed up, Moina's
Mhm.
husband. And do you think that's Moina on the floor kneeling before the spirit?
It would have been her, or they had a couple of female acolytes that would play roles, but probably her. A French journalist who went to one of their open public Isis rituals or Egyptian rituals actually said that she was by far the more powerful figure on the stage. And
Wow.
really drew the attention. He thought, well, Samuel Mathers didn't have a very good French accent, which she did, and so he was and for some reason he didn't seem as powerful.
Although one of the things at this point, the Golden Dawn is starting to break up. Florence is in charge of the London office, and she is the leader, forming a 7-person committee to investigate charges of fraud against Mathers. And in retaliation, this is one of my favorite magical spells. Mathers dismisses Farr as the leader and threatens the other members with a spell called the Punitive Current. And it was demonstrated by him taking peas, naming them after each Golden Dawn chief that didn't agree with him in London, and cursing them. So it's
Yeah.
really,
Primarily Crowley, of course, but at
yes,
that point, yeah.
exactly. So this is
Yeah.
now the Golden Dawn is sort of at odds in terms of influences. Where did they start? Annie doesn't particularly like the way that Florence is running it. So now we're going to get into the idea. Mary, can you explain to us what were the mottos that people had to adapt as they were becoming members of the Golden Dawn?
Yeah, well, a lot of the orders of various kinds, including the Freemasons and an aspect of the Freemasons called the Societas Rosicruciana, they would create mottos for themselves to live by, just like knights would also take mottos to live by. But it was even more than that in a magical sense, in that it was calling on that higher self and making a direct link between your higher self. So your higher self was the one that was coming into conversation with the holy guardian angel. So it wasn't your worldly self that has all the foibles and the problems and issues and goes home and fights with their partner or whatever. Instead, while you were in this magical state, it was your highest self that was operating. And the motto represented those highest ideals
And can you
that
talk
you
to
want to
what
live by.
this model that Moina had? I mean, it was kind of, she was sort of like saying she wasn't going to regret anything. Is that what she means by I leave no step behind?
Um, at the time, I checked with a couple of Latin scholars and looked up what I could find online, which back in, 89 was not a whole lot, and came up with I leave no step behind. I leave no traces behind. And actually, among the four women, there was the least material about her. Any of their papers were destroyed. And so we know very, very little about her when you consider how important she and McGregor were, their workings. So that's how I interpret it. But then today I was looking online and I found another interpretation based on a standard use of the vestigia nulla retrorsum thing is I never retrace my steps, meaning I never go backwards. I'm always going forward. I never look back at who or what I was. I'm always, progressing towards, whatever I can become. And I now, I want to rewrite my book because I think that might be more apt than the leaving no traces behind her. But in a sense, it also was that in that she um, uh, didn't want people to be following her. And Dion Fortune did something similar, another magician later, in that when she died, she had requested that all images of her and personal papers be destroyed. So they didn't want their personal lives to be what was followed later on.
And
Um,
this
yeah.
motto that Annie did, bravely and justly, or strongly and rightly. Do you think that's because she had the money from, because she was one of the wealthiest heiresses in London at the time and she paid a lot of the Golden Dawn bills? Do you think she was saying, I get to decide? Is this what her?
I think not so much that I get to decide as I am the upholder of these values.
Yes.
I stand for, it's like somebody that stands for pure justice, the laws of the land, the Constitution. We won't get into that, but and whenever you do that, it's like what laws, because sometimes there's laws that are in conflict with each other. There's various things. So for her, there were certain values that she understood the Golden Dawn to be based around and things that they stood for. And she would get very upset if she felt that was being, uh, broken, not followed. like when MacGregor Mathers became much more interested in being Le Comte de Glenstray, a Scottish lord, which he was not actually Scottish. He took this on and wanted to bring back Bonnie Prince Charlie and all of those people to the rulership. And so, yeah, she didn't like the fact that he was going in that direction rather than the focus that had been on the Golden Dawn. And also, there was one of the members that started bringing in what we would call today sex magic. And Annie, being a spinster, I don't know what her own personal philosophy was on this, but she did not want she didn't feel that sex magic should be part of the teachings. And Moina did write a letter back to her that we still have, that was this was only to be taught at the uttermost top levels, because it was not sex magic on the material physical level.
And Moina and Samuel supposedly had a non-sexual marriage. Is that correct?
That's what she claimed in the letter, or at least it is strongly, very strongly implied in the letter.
Yeah.
But somebody has said that possibly that was just her writing to Annie.
I see. On that day,
So,
it was a non-sexual marriage. Okay.
Yeah, to try and convince Annie, really everything's okay. We're not going out and, creating, because later on there were complications, which you'll get to.
Yes.
Around that.
So,
Yeah.
and talking about Florence Farr, I mean, her motto seems so odd to me. Wisdom is given to the wise as a gift. Is that a correct interpretation?
The way I phrase it, which is the same thing, but just a different order of words, is wisdom is given as a gift to the wise.
I see. All right.
So, in other words, it's a paradox, a divine paradox.
Okay.
Wisdom is given to the wise as a gift. It's like it's almost like at some point we stumble into wisdom, and along with that comes some gift of understanding.
Okay, that's great. I can see that better now, because it seemed a
Yeah.
little circular to me when I was trying to unravel it.
And
And
it's a divine paradox,
there you
which I
go.
think is
Yeah.
wonderful.
And looking at Maud's motto, look beyond.
That's not the title that she actually used. She was Pial, per ignum ad lucem,
Oh,
through the fire to the light. That was actually, and she was called, they would often use their initials, the initials of their motto, or one word from their motto as the name they would call each other. So she had the initials, per ignum ad lucem, Pial, was what she was called, Pial, and Annie was called Fortiter, and Moina was called Vestigia.
and wasn't
And
Florence called SSDD?
that's how they would write her name often, yeah, or Sapiencia.
Yeah, there we go. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so here we have the mottos that the people believed in, and I want to just introduce just a
Oh,
few
wait,
other.
one more thing. Per ignum ad lucem, through the fire to the light, which was her statement about her work for Ireland.
Oh, that's lovely.
She was willing to go through the fire to get
To the light.
to the light. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, and I'm just going to bring up a few other Golden Dawn women. Here we have Florence Farr's sister, Henrietta Page, Paget, rather. And
yeah.
her motto was, "While I breathe, I hope," which sounds hopeful. Then we have Oscar Wilde's wife, Constance Wilde, who endures, conquers, and given her sad story, I really hope she did conquer for a while. But we have this other interesting artist from the Slade School named Isabella de Steger. And her motto was, "I aim higher." And she was kind of an unknown person. She actually was one of the most prolific painters during this time. And she had exhibited at the Royal Academy. She had 60 to 70 different exhibits in her lifetime from the Victorian Albert, but she loved to paint scenes from the Golden Dawn. And unfortunately, most of her works were kept in one warehouse, and due to a terrific fire, they burned. But Isabel, I think, was a really interesting member of this, sort of like the minor characters in the Golden Dawn. And one more society woman that belonged to the Golden Dawn that I had to include because she was just so unusual. She came from a very wealthy background. Her husband was the major general in Africa. Her son became one of the most wealthy landowners in Kenya. And when she came back to London, she gave quite a bit of money when Annie Horniman was getting disillusioned. And I just love the fact that her picture associated with the Golden Dawn is in this sort of African garb. But her motto puzzles me a little bit, Mary. It's just always.
Yeah. I have no idea. No,
Okay.
I didn't know anything about her actually. I was familiar with the other figures. Isabel de Steger also did translations and an introduction to, oh, the name of the book escaped me now, but it's one of the major kind of spiritual books of the time.
And I'm just going to show our lovely audience just some of the fantastical mottos that people came up with to be part of the Golden Dawn. These are all women, and some of their mottos. What's your favorite on this list, Mary?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Let's see. Either I shatter or flying things.
I agree.
I can go.
Yeah, I think I like the ruler of astral light myself, but I think that's a lot to live up to.
Yeah.
But
Well, and they also, an archangel, yeah. So a major figure in the angelic realms. Yes.
And I think there was a big association too that people wanted to still be seen that they were Christian. And so when they were saying things in thee, O Lord, have hoped, that they still wanted to make sure that they didn't want to be seen as pagans worshiping in some temple in skeevy areas of London. But flying things and I shatter, I think, are two of my favorite too.
Yeah, and actually, I used to, right after the book came out for quite a few years, do workshops. I was already doing workshops in various feminist things, but I was doing women's magic workshops. And one of the requirements was everybody who took the class with me was to come up with their own motto. So it was like a meditation, a deep meditation on what is your highest aspiration. And if you're to name your highest self that's going to be in contact with a holy guardian angel, how can you express the very best that you can imagine yourself to be?
Oh, that's lovely. It sort of reminds me as a child taking the brownie fly-up ceremonies.
Uh-huh.
You'd have a lake of aluminum foil with little candles.
Oh,
And
yes.
it was dark and scary, and you flew up, somehow you became a Girl Scout from being a brownie through this magical ceremony, getting in touch with the higher levels, which I think is still part of us.
I lived that for my daughters. Rising up, I did a whole reading of the time of that so that they would know how magical it could be, because my own initiation was done in a very magical way too.
Wonderful.
I always remembered that.
And as the Golden Dawn was sort of coming to a close, we have the person that Mary was talking about, which was Dion Fortune, who was born Violet Firth. And she had not been really that enamored of the Golden Dawn. She had written that the Order of the Golden Dawn was severely damaged by the First World War. Mathers died in Paris from influenza. And when she came in, she said it was manned mostly by widows and gray-beard ancients and did not appear to be a very promising field of occult endeavor. But it seems that if there was a woman who went on to carry on the identity of the kind of magical process, it was Dion Fortune. Is that correct?
Definitely in England, she carried it on. And one of the things is that her practice wasn't static. And so she ended up with at least three different, instead of having the three initiatory levels, it was three different kinds of connections, because we had the magic that operates with the land, and the spirits of the land, that was focused around Glastonbury. And then there was, magic that was more of a ceremonial kind of magic. Yeah, and her novels are actually one of the very best ways to get a sense of the kind of magic that she did.
Oh, wonderful. And I was so pleased, Mary, that I was able to dig up a photograph of her, because as you were saying, it's very hard
Very
to
rare.
find a picture of her in her ceremonial garbs. So the real demise of the Golden Dawn started with this character, Madame Horace, and she, in about 1901, she was part of a con group with this person she said was her son, but was actually her husband. They met Mathers in Paris, and then they ended up in London. Is that correct?
They had gone back and forth, I think, from London. They tried to do something in London, and they heard about Mathers in Paris. Went there. They also started some uh, magical groups in the U.S. And she spent quite a few years in jail after her various endeavors.
Yes.
Even early on in the States, which is where she was from.
Yeah. I mean, it's really sad because in a way, everybody's scattered because she and this person that she was with, they would entice young ladies to come and stay with them because he was supposedly being, a god or something, and they would be so lucky to have sex with him. And so they were eventually arrested, and she spent 7 years in jail on charges of larceny and rape, and he
Yeah,
spent, I think, 15 years. So
yeah.
at that time in Victorian London in the early 1900s, you do not, after Oscar Wilde especially, you do not want to be associated with anything like this. So that
Yeah.
was pretty much the end of that. And I think the thing that was so interesting, the thing that really busted them up was the 16-year-old girl that got convinced to come and stay with him, and they stole all her jewelry. And that's the only person that stepped forward first to go to the police because she was outraged. And then
Yeah.
from that, the
Yeah, I
whole,
think her mother, got really upset about it, and
yeah.
the two of them ended up going there. Yeah, that people described her as having these piercing eyes that were just mesmerizing, and so you would try to avoid looking at her eyes because she might capture you. And
Yes, you can sort of see in this mugshot that she's really, working it. So,
yeah,
so here we have the dissolution of the Golden Dawn in Florence left in she left in 1902 after the end of the Madame Horace situation.
and
Beatrice,
I do want to say it's not the total dissolution because it exists today in many,
that's right.
many different places, but of the original group that was founded in 1888, just went up to 1902.
That's
So
right.
it didn't last that long.
But thank goodness there's some incarnations of it all over the
Oh
place.
yeah.
So, and Beatrice actually left. She was kind of a tormented painter, and unfortunately, she committed suicide at the age of 28. We
Mm.
have Maud, who she actually went off to Paris. She actually lived the longest. She lived to be 87 years old. And so but she went on to champion for Home Rule for Ireland and inspiring Yeats and doing all sorts of other political things. Annie went on to lead two other theaters besides working with Yeats, the Abbey Theatre in Dublin and the Gaiety Theatre in Manchester. And then, of course, we have Moina, who died at the age of 63.
Yeah.
So these were some,
And yeah, I just want to say one of the reasons why I was able to get so much, I mentioned it was because of the material kept by the men in their lives. They were close, especially Maud and Florence, very close with three Nobel Prize winners,
yes,
intimately close. One of them was, of course, Bernard Shaw, and the other one was Yeats, and then Maud's son, Sean McBride. She married an Irish revolutionary who was killed during one of the revolutionary acts, John McBride. But Sean McBride, her son, was the first president of Amnesty International. Amnesty International.
Amnesty International. Oh, for heaven's
Yes, he
sakes.
was one of the founders of it and first president, and also a minister for Ireland when it became a nation. So he became very prominent and carried on his mother's work of course, Amnesty International. It was his mother's work of trying to free prisoners,
Amazing.
their
So
beginning.
as we wind down this presentation, I did just want to bring up a screen. If any of you are interested in trying to find more information about mottos or who some of these people were that were part of the Golden Dawn, you can take a picture of this. This recording will also be on YouTube, and you can go back and check it out then. But here has a complete list of the Golden Dawn members. And there's also a fascinating article written on Medium about Madame Horace and what happened with her. And
And I do want to say that we're so lucky now because more and more stuff gets revealed and put on the internet. And so now we can keep following their stories, and new things occasionally turn up.
Yes, I mean, I Googled Pamela Coleman Smith, I think every other week, and it's astounding what happens. It's just, oh, I
Yeah.
found this thing in my aunt's, attic. So it's pretty fabulous.
Yeah.
So in closing, I want to, this part of the presentation, I just want to thank Mary Greer for being here and sharing her extensive knowledge on all things, not only about Tarot and the women of the Golden Dawn, but her real authentic empirical knowledge of magic and belonging to the Golden Dawn. You can see her website down here for her upcoming events, her books, her lectures. So check that out. I think these are some pictures of you at Omega. Is that correct, Mary?
Yeah, the one on the right is Omega, and the one in the middle was at a conference in China, and the one on the left was in Montreal.
Oh, fantastic. I'm
Yeah.
just going to do a quick plug for my books. They are
Yes.
magical fantasy based on the lives of Pamela Coleman Smith. And so they're not historical fiction straight. They're magical realism, but they have Annie Horniman and Maud and Pamela and all of them in there. And I encourage you to look at them. But
Yeah.
now we get to have a nice question and answer with our audience. So I'm going to look in our chat field. I see some people have hands raised. Let me see if I can find you. Let me go to gallery view. We had a couple questions here for a second. No, there. But if you have a question, you can put it in the chat field and we'll address it. Oh, I'm getting a secret message here. Oh, Mary, when is your
Yes.
next class and what are you teaching?
The next one will be Omega here. I'm doing some stuff in Mexico, and then I'll be going off to China again. But Omega in August is the next thing that I will be doing. It's eomega.org, eomega, omega.org, and just put tarot in the search, and that will be in early August.
Okay.
So please come join us. We've been going for 35 years, and it's just such an amazing experience to be there. We've got a weekend conference and a 5-day in-depth. Have a lot of fun, hang out together, play card games, as well as doing readings for each other in the cafe. It's fabulous.
Mary, here's someone else asking, do you do any more of the tours like you did with Susan in England, or are you doing any more of those?
Nothing scheduled right now.
Okay.
No, yeah.
Yeah, I was so, we were just talking, reminiscing. That was 2017 that we did that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a wonderful experience. Well, my friends, it's been over an hour that I have asked Mary to talk with us, so I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much for joining us. And this will be on YouTube. I will send a reminder to everybody who signed up. And once again, Mary Greer, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and experience on this.
And thank you for all the things that you found and all the work that you're doing around Pamela Coleman Smith and Women of the Golden Dawn.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, have a good night. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.